Hardest hit were Debbie Reynolds' husband, Harry Carl, with losses close to $1 million. Singer Tony Martin, Zeppo Marx, and comedian Phil Silvers, who said at the trial, quote, "Let's just say I'll be hitchhiking home." World Poker Tour host Mike Sexton, a WSOP winner and unofficial ambassador for the game, says, "My partner Vince Van Patten, his dad, actor Dick Van Patten, played poker for 30 years with Hollywood celebrities. Don Adams played all the time. Kojak's, Telly Savalas played all the time. The Odd Couple guy, Walter Matthau, he played a lot. Pollock once played in a game with Don Adams in a famous house game hosted by sports agent Norby Walters. Quote, he probably had the most famous game of the last 20 years, says Pollock. This particular night, there was Sharon Stone, Sid Caesar, Charlie Durning, Eric Roberts, Mimi Rogers, and a late arriver was Don Adams. This was probably 6 months before his passing. He walks in. It's old Joe moving slow. It takes him 10 minutes to get from the door to the table, it seems like. Doesn't say a thing after he sits down. It's heartbreaking, really. There's a round table of stories, but he's not really participating. Finally, Eric Roberts has to leave. He got an early flight to New York. He says his goodbyes. Now it's like 6 minutes later, and it's Don Adams' turn to deal. He's got to stand up so he can get the cards all the way around the table. And he finally speaks for the first time in 3 hours, and he says, "Is it just me, or is that kid actually better looking than his sister?" Sharon Stone was crying. She was laughing so hard. It was a bombshell. The timing was sick. He set us up. Director Mike Binder's regular Wednesday night game routinely featured Larry David, again Rod Lurie, and local Fox weatherman Mark Thompson, who had to leave at 10:45 to do the weather. So we'd all sit there waiting for his poker reference in the local weather report, Binder says. "Well, it looks like the storm front is bringing in a full house of rain." The big game was Johnny Carson's game with Chevy Chase and Steve Martin.
Wow.
That was the big game for years. And they used to have a really good game in the back upstairs at Planet Hollywood. They would feed us and take care of us. It was awesome. Hank Azaria, Simpsons co-creator Sam Simon, Lou Diamond Phillips, and Macaulay Culkin have all hosted prominent house games in the past 20 years. But McGuire's game is widely considered the biggest, both in stakes and in prestige. Now, for contemporary Hollywood, in the film Rounders in 1998, it really did a lot to galvanize interest in poker, quoting emeritus figures like Doyle Brunson, Amarillo Slim, and Jack King's Confessions of a Winning Poker Player, and coining half a dozen aphorisms in the process. Quote, generally, the rule is, the nicer the guy, the poorer the card player. The game attracts rich flounders, and they in turn attract the sharks. And the sanguinary, quote, it's like the Nature Channel. You don't see the piranhas eating each other, do you? But it was roughly 2003 with the stateside introduction of the pocket cam that could broadcast the players' hole cards, and its documentation of that year's World Series of Poker win by Chris Moneymaker, the first world champion to ever qualify via an online gaming site, when this latest generation of Hollywood poker players came of age. It started around the time of the Moneymaker win, says screenwriter Brandon Boyce, known for the film Apt Pupil, and he's got some TV series coming up. He's also an avid poker player. Quote, 10 years ago, everyone was playing backgammon. Now, McGuire was one of those who people remember pulling in a pretty good supplementary income playing backgammon with the crew on his earlier pictures. Boyce also remembers McGuire approaching a table of a dozen people or more at a restaurant one time and saying, quote, I can set the line for how many produced writers are sitting at this table. Now, as Boyce remembers it, I said, go ahead. And he said, 4. I looked around the table and he made the line perfectly. There were 4 produced writers at the table. He's that good of a gambler. Professional poker poster boy Daniel Negreanu, whose wholesome Canadian image belies ruthlessness after the cards have been dealt, is credited with mentoring McGuire and other young Hollywood players, although he downplays his contributions. But, like a lot of those queried, he expresses admiration for the actor's poker skills and describes an early experience facing McGuire across the felt. One of the first times I played with Toby, he did something that was really sharp in a pot where he was bluffing, Negreanu says. He did something to act like he had the absolute nuts, and he knew I would pick up on it. And I saw it, and I was like, okay, and I threw the hand away. And then he ended up showing me the bluff. He has the ability to fake weakness or strength, which is definitely an asset when you play poker. Now, the dispute came down to what Ronald Richards, attorney for 3 of the defendants, calls a disagreement of the law. Basically, if it's a friendly home game, it's legal in Beverly Hills and LA County, including West LA. Illegal in Los Angeles proper, but rarely prosecuted, and legal under California state law, which means local laws would be overturned were they prosecuted and successfully appealed. Pollock once had a DA tell him, unless someone in the game is shooting heroin and the drug dealer comes to your house and there's a shootout, there's not a cop or court in the land that has time for any of your bullshit. However, a home game is illegal in any jurisdiction if it's a quote-unquote controlled game requiring municipal or state licenses. And the difference is the presence of something called the rake. Raking the pot is where the house takes a fixed percentage of the winnings, presumably in exchange for expediting the hotel suite, tables, dealers, refreshments, and any other amenities required by the players, which is why the aforementioned lawsuit is focused on $473,200 in 19 separate checks, ranging from $700 to low 6 figures, which Ruderman made out to the unlikely name Molly Bloom. Apparently not a character in James Joyce's Ulysses, but rather the sister of Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver and former Olympic skier Jeremy Bloom. Miss Bloom was a quote-unquote event planner who used Ruderman's $500,000 to take care of things like chips and peanuts, as well as the decidedly more exotic-sounding massage girls.
I was going to say, that's a lot of peanuts.
Yeah, for the record.
Yeah.
And for the record, massage girls are common in high-end casino environments, often administering rub-downs right at the table, and are generally separate from prostitutes and their many florid varieties. Labeled a poker madam, sexy Manhattan poker princess, and a stunning brunette in the tabloids, Bloom's tale took a particularly lurid turn in June when it was reported that, and this is way back in June, many years, after relocating to Manhattan in 2009 and organizing similar games for the financial community, two reputed Russian mobsters had, quote-unquote, pushed her around a little bit. Russian mobsters, back to the top of the show, Heli Namad, do math, folks. Star Magazine also reported at the time that A-Rod, Alex Rodriguez, the then celebrated third baseman for the New York Yankees, played in at least 2 games in 2009 organized by Bloom, one in Miami, one at the L.A. home of record mogul Cody Leibel, one of those who was being sued at the time, and both of which ended with players refusing to cover their substantial losses. A-Rod may have faced disciplinary actions at the time stemming from these allegations, with further revelations almost certain to come in legal documents. Bloom claims she, quote, acted for the benefit of third parties, transferred, quote, a large percentage of such transfers to those third parties, and, quote, served as a mere conduit for funds. Trustees have in the past filed actions against casinos to get money that was used to cover markers, says attorney Howard Ehrenberg, defending his legal strategy. Under bankruptcy law, if the recipient of the money had no knowledge of where the money came from, then that can be a defense against having to return it. But in this case, because the game was illegal under California law, the recipients are not able to use the good faith defense. That is the key distinction. It was not a friendly game. It was a game where the organizer was being compensated for running the game. Now, Ehrenberg accepted McGuire's argument that losses might offset his liability, but only if the money was paid directly to capital partners and not to Ruderman himself, as seemed to have been the case. He claims he tried to handle the matter discreetly and without publicity, but was rebuffed by counsel. Quote, she got tips for providing services contingent to a poker game, says drug lawyer Ronald Richards, Bloom's attorney at the time. And he also represented Chuck Pacheco and Cassavetes. That's what an event planner does. It's not an illegal game. At the time, Brad Ruderman was a well-respected hedge fund manager. There has never been a prosecution of the players in a home game, rake or not, and I could not find one against an operator. It's very rare. By the way, he said, the statute of limitations has long run out. Now, among the closer-knit poker community, sentiment understandably runs strongly in favor of the players. Look, you charge everyone $200 when they first come in, and then the winners have an option to tip whoever the girl was that called the players to put the game together, says Mike Sexton, who has actually played in that game. They don't rake the pots. If you want to tip the girl at the end when you win, then that's what happens. To say it's an underground casino and all that, nonsense, says the quote unquote ambassador of poker. In fact, you would have a hard time finding serious poker players who, when you think about it, even consider it a form of gambling. Quote, if